Welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Danny. I hope you're having a wonderful day whenever you're listening to this. And thank you so much for sharing your time with me. It genuinely means the absolute world. Today's podcast is going to revolve around identity. And I actually want to start by asking you a question to kick this podcast off and get you thinking about how this episode might be relevant to you and how you might need to think about this topic as a whole. So, the question is, what is one part of your identity right now that has nothing to do with how you train, how you look, so your physique, or how you perform? I want you to think about that. Write the answer to that question down in your phone or on a written notepad. If you can't think of something, I want you to, after you've listened to today's podcast and you understand the importance of identifying these things, I want you to go away and have a think about it throughout the rest of your day or the rest of your week and to start to kind of reestablish, I guess, your sense of self and who you are outside of it just being tied to fitness. And I'm going to explain why that's important in today's podcast. So please hang on for that because I know that a lot of you listening to this podcast may have kind of heard the narrative of it's important to identify with the version of you that you want to be. So if, for example, you want to be an athlete. You identify with being an athlete and therefore you act as an athlete and you get where you want to be. That is great and that has its benefits, but it's important that you don't take that so far that being an athlete becomes your entire identity, because then if that sport is taken away from you for whatever reason, or you have to take a break from it, you're going to really struggle. You're going to have a bit of an identity crisis. You're going to feel extremely lost, and you may well struggle with things like your mental health as a result of that, maybe your relationship with food, your body image, and that can be so harmful and so disorientating as well. And I've been through that after having moved away from the sport of bodybuilding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with that in today's podcast, but that's what I want you to have a think about. It's okay to have a sport or a training style or being a hardworking person as a part of your identity. You just want to make sure that you have lots of different things that make up your sense of self, as opposed to your sense of self and your entire identity being wrapped up in one individual thing, because that's where we're likely to run into trouble. And it's so common in the fitness industry for us to pigeonhole ourselves and make our routines, our behaviors, our training styles, our sports such a large part of our identity, or even our work if you're a coach listening to this, which is great to an extent, but when it becomes our entire sense of self, our entire sense of identity, or too much of that, a too large proportion, it can make it incredibly difficult to step away from the behaviors that we have identified with, even if stepping away from those behaviors is what we truly need, whether that be, short term, taking an extra rest day, or whether that be over the long term, pivoting a little bit and moving away from a certain training style or sport if it is no longer serving us. So, an example of that is, as I mentioned previously, when I decided to stop competing in bodybuilding. Now, at the time when I competed, the sport was my entire life, personally and professionally. So I competed in bodybuilding for, I think it was 5 years in total, for those of you who don't know. And not only did I compete in bodybuilding myself and I was chasing my IFBB Pro card, but I was also coaching competitors. So I was a prep coach. That was my entire business model. So you can imagine how daunting it was to step away from that sport because being a bikini athlete was who I was. It was what I was known for, both in person and on social media. So when I stepped away from the sport, it wasn't just the routine that had to change or my training style or the kind of way I was living my life. I lost the identity that I had built my entire life around, both personally and professionally. And that was so disorientating. I felt so lost. I had no idea what to do with myself. I had no sense of self. And I had to sit with a lot of uncertainty during that period of time. I had to sit with a lot of fear. I had to grieve the previous version of myself. And I just had no idea who I was if I wasn't a bikini athlete and if I wasn't a prep coach anymore. And it took me a long time to reestablish my sense of self and my identity outside of that. Whereas if I had kept other aspects of my identity intact whilst I was competing in bodybuilding. And if I was a little bit more careful not to let the sport become my entire life, it would have made that transition so much easier. And it would have been much less detrimental for my physical and mental health when I moved away from the sport because it would have been like, okay, I'm not competing anymore, but I still have all of these other things that make me me, and all of these other things that make me happy, that I enjoy, that add up and make me me. Whereas because it was literally my entire life and I didn't really invest much time, energy, and effort into anything outside of the sport of bodybuilding, I was completely lost. And it took me a long time, a lot of kind of leaning on the people in my life that the relationships that had nothing to do with, how I trained or how I looked on stage. I really lent on them and made new connections with new people that weren't in the sport of bodybuilding. That was a large part of that transition for me, and that was what helps keep me sane during that transition and helped me reestablish my sense of self is just leaning on those people because that leaning on those people and establishing new connections and new friendships that I still have now and are the best friendships I've ever had in my entire life reminded me that I was still me, and I it reminded me that I had so much more to offer the world even without being a bikini competitor, without that identity that I had spent so many years building. So that was a large part of what helped me through that transition is leaning on friendships that had nothing to do with bodybuilding and creating new connections outside of the sport, trying different training styles, trying different hobbies. I started reading, sounds minor, but genuinely had a really positive impact. I started reading fantasy books and found a massive interest in that. And that was just amazing for me because not only was it a new hobby that I knew was going to be a large part of me because I enjoyed it so much, but it also helped me switch off from work. It was almost a form of escapism and still is for me because when you're reading, obviously you can't think about much else. You have to concentrate on the words on the pages and the story that's evolving in front of you. You have to switch off from other aspects of life. And so it served as a great way of me being able to enjoy my downtime and forcing me to have downtime and switch off from work, was obviously so good for my overall health and well-being, as well as it being something which contributed to this new kind of sense of self and made up a part of me moving forwards. So experimenting with new hobbies, trying different things, even if it's stuff that I didn't continue with. After I competed in bodybuilding, I tried CrossFit, did that for a while, really enjoyed it at the time, didn't continue it long term, but it just it made me realize that there was more to life and there was lots of different ways of training, and training didn't have to look a certain way, and it was okay to experiment with different things. And it taught me that nothing, bad was going to happen as a result of that. I wasn't going to like automatically lose all of my muscle tissue by training in different ways. And that was really reassuring and comforting when I had that realization, and it gave me so much more freedom with my training. And journaling definitely came into me reestablishing my sense of self as well, and thinking about what my values really were, what mattered to me, how I wanted my life to look in 5 years. All of this was amazing. Also, trying different foods and realizing that I was actually a foodie. Like for a long time, when I was competing in bodybuilding, I told myself that food was just fuel for me. And I told myself that I wasn't really someone who really cared about trying different foods or going out to eat and having, extravagant meals or having baked goods. But actually, after coming away from bodybuilding, I realized that was just a story that I told myself because it fit with being a bikini competitor and it fit with succeeding in the sport of bodybuilding. But actually, I found out through trying different foods and allowing myself freedom with food after competing in bodybuilding that I actually love food. I love going out for food. I love trying new things. I'm definitely someone that when I'm in my usual routine, I do find it easy to stick to a lot of the same foods and, especially living alone. It's a lot of effort to make extravagant meals every night, so it's not like I do that. However, I do enjoy going out for meals. I do enjoy trying new foods. I enjoy getting baked goods like brownies or blondies or almond croissants, my absolute favorite thing in the world. Whereas when I was bodybuilding, I told myself that like I wasn't bothered about any of these things. So being a bit of a foodie has become a part of my identity, and I have so many different kind of parts of myself now that if one of those things was to, for whatever reason, be taken away from me, I wouldn't lose my entire sense of self. I wouldn't feel lost because I would still have so many different things that make me me and so many different aspects of my life that make me happy and things that bring me joy. And that's where true health lies, because it enables you to pivot when you need to without feeling that complete loss of identity, that loss of your sense of self. And that is such a powerful position to be in because it enables you to really be in control of your life and do what makes you happy in the moment and what's genuinely right for you in the moment, rather than you feeling stuck pursuing a certain goal or training in a certain way or stuck in a certain sport because you don't know who you are without it. So I really hope that that helps you understand how letting a sport, a training style, or even a behavior become something that you so heavily identify with can become harmful over the long term if you take it to the extreme, even if it might have some benefits in the short term, because we know it's like if you look at transformation challenges, for example, say you've got an 8 week transformation challenge, that transformation challenge may serve someone over the course of the 8 weeks, but over the long term, they may end up binge eating afterwards and end up with more detriments to their health, more consequences to that 8 week challenges than they do benefits. But in the 8 weeks, you'd look at those 8 weeks and be like, oh, they've achieved, great progress, faster progress than they might have done if they took a long-term approach. And so you might look in the short term and be like, yeah, that's serving them. But actually, if you look at the long term, if you look at 6 months, a year, that has caused way more harm than good. And that is a great analogy for the identity piece, because if you heavily identify with something, say a sport or a training style, in the short term, in the 8 weeks, in the 12 weeks, you may see very quick progress in that sport. You may see very quick progress in training because you've so heavily identified with that thing and you don't really have much sense of self or much going on outside of it. And so you might see quick progress in the short term, but over the long term, that's where you see the negatives play out. because that's when you struggle to take a rest day when you need a rest day, and a rest day is the most productive thing you could possibly do. Or that's where you end up with a really unhealthy relationship with training to the point you're overtraining and you're therefore not seeing the adaptations that you want to see because you haven't got time to recover. Or you see an impaired relationship with food or your body image, or you struggle to, like I said before, step away from the sport or the training style. You struggle to adapt when adapting is exactly what you need for your overall health, well-being, and success. So it's so important that when we look at these topics such as identity, we're looking at the long term rather than the short term, because someone in the fitness industry might absolutely be like, yeah, identify with that sport. Um, See yourself as an athlete because you're going to see more results as a result of that. But yeah, you might see results in the short term, but what about the long term? It's so important to think long term whenever we're considering whether something is beneficial for us or not, as opposed to just looking at the next 8, 10, or 12 weeks. So that's what I want you to really have a think about. It's not about stopping a sport, a training style, or a behavior from becoming a part of your identity altogether, but it's about making sure that your sense of self doesn't just rest on one thing and nothing else. So that the next time a routine, a goal, or a behavior has to change, you're not left wondering who you are without it, and you're not resistant to that change if it is the right thing for you. So, back to that question, what is one part of your identity right now that has nothing to do with how you train, look, or perform? And if you can't think of that, what could you do over this next week to move you forwards to being able to identify something that is a part of your identity that has nothing to do with those things? Maybe it could be trying something new, a new hobby, a new training style. Maybe it could be connecting with a friend. Maybe it could be reaching out to someone new. Maybe it could be just taking note of where you find joy in your week. It could be going for a coffee. It could be going for a walk outside in nature. Maybe you're somebody who loves the outdoors. It could be asking your partner, what makes me me outside of the way that I look, perform, or train. And that could contribute to your sense of self outside of that. So have a think about what realistic step you can take this next week to establish your sense of self outside of fitness. And let me know who I'd love to hear your answers to that question of what is one part of your identity right now that has nothing to do with fitness. DM me on Instagram, let me know your answer to that question. Or if you don't know the answer, let me know what you're going to do this week to help you establish that. And if you don't know that, ask me for advice and I will tell you one thing that you can do this week to help you establish your sense of self outside of fitness. If you drop me a DM and say, Danny, I listened to the podcast this week. Could you give me something that I could do this week to help me establish my sense of self outside of fitness? And I will give you a tangible, realistic step that you can take. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. I appreciate it so much. If you have any questions, if you want to DM me, if you want to chat, I would genuinely love to hear from you. And if you're interested in my support with your goals, I currently have a couple of one-to-one coaching spaces available online at the moment. I am filling up, so please get in touch if you are interested. And I would absolutely love, especially if you're a listener of the podcast, I would love to support you with your goals whilst improving your health and quality of life. So please drop me a DM with the word coaching if you're interested, and let's get you booked in for a free consultation call where we can have a chat about you and your goals and discuss how I might be able to support you with them. Have a lovely rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and I will see you next week.